How many of you remember your first time? You know your first time. If you're here with your spouse, you probably don't want to talk about it because they may not have been your first time. But how many of you remember your first time? How nervous you were? You probably think I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about my first time here speaking at the U-Nite service. See where your minds are? How quickly they go. I'm talking about this is my first time speaking at the U-Nite service, and I want to thank Reverend Nian for inviting me. She's been inviting me for a while, and I finally said yes, so thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I am the divine expression of infinite creative energy. And where does that come from? It first starts with our breathing. So I want you to breathe into this as I get us started. Today is Grandparents' Day. How many of you are grandparents and proud of it? I am certainly one. I have 3 A's and a J: Alondra, Alexis, Alexander, and Jalen. And I just love them. And I know I speak for all of you grandparents, all of you parents whose grandparents dote on your children more than they did on you, because you know what? If we had known grandchildren would be so much fun, we would have skipped a step. So, in honor of Grandparents' Day, a 6-year-old was asked where his grandmother lived. He said, "Oh, she lives at the airport. And when we want her, we just go get her. And when we're tired of her, we take her back." Some grandparents are like that. A 2nd grader came home from school and said to her grandmother, "Grandma, guess what? We learned how to make babies today." The grandmother was shocked. Just caught her breath. And so she says, "That's interesting. How do you make babies?" He said, "It's simple. You just change the Y to I and add ES." A grandmother was telling her little granddaughter what her own childhood was like. And you know these conversations. Your hair is starting to turn a little silver. You're getting a little wrinkled. And they wonder if you were ever a child anyway. How did you get there? So she's explaining, we used to skate outside on the pond. I had a swing made from a tire. It hung from a tree in our front yard. We rode our pony. We picked wild raspberries in the woods. And the little girl got wide out, and she took a long look at her grandma, and she said, I sure wish I'd gotten to know you sooner." Okay. So becoming a grandmother is wonderful. One moment you're just a mother, and the next moment you're all wise and prehistoric. So my grandchildren see me as prehistoric. I had this Rolodex. How many of you, I know some of you don't, you millennials, what's a Rolodex? Well, it looks like a Ferris wheel, right? So I asked my granddaughter, Jalen, to go down to my office and bring me my Rolodex. Of course, she didn't know what a Rolodex was. I said, "It looks like a small Ferris wheel like you ride at Worlds of Fun." So she brings this thing and she goes, "What is this?" And I go, "That's where I keep all my business cards." She said, "Nana, you got a phone. Why don't you put it in your phone?" But then you can't touch it, you know, and you can't, if your phone blanks out, you know, you need paper. I mean, I know, Nian asked me recently why I didn't respond to her text messages. Or, no, what was it, Nian? Facebook. Why didn't I said, "You'll never get me on Facebook. I'm there one day, and then months later somebody says, I guess you don't want to be friends with me anymore." Who ever heard of that? Because I didn't respond on Facebook. So I said, "Well, Nian, you can't reach me on Facebook. If you're trying to reach me," she was taking it personally. I wasn't communicating. You know, we weren't friends. And I said, "No, you got to email me or text me." She said, "Who emails?" So different context, right? So Marnie Voss is going to be the headliner, one of the headliners for our Womankind conference on Saturday, and she is really funny. And so I just pulled a few quotes from some of the headliners, and hers is, "There's no place good humor and kindness cannot go, and there shouldn't be." So if you're in church and it's so serious that you can't laugh, you're in the wrong church. You need to be going somewhere where you can really be yourself and enjoy it. So I hope you all will enjoy the service today. Every year in the end of December, we have what's called a burning bowl ceremony. And it's for getting rid of the old and welcoming the new. So there's a bowl in the middle of the sanctuary. In this sanctuary, it'll be somewhere around here. In the main service, it'll be downstairs and upstairs in the balcony. And at a certain point in the service, congregants are asked to write down something that they no longer want to carry with them in the new year. maybe some hurt, some anger, some pain, some resentment, something that you want, maybe you want to shed a few pounds, but something you want to not carry forward into the new year. And so once you take your little litmus paper and you place it in the fire, and they go row by row, and you place it in the fire, you pick up what's called an angel card. And the angel card will have a word or a quote or a phrase that will only mean something to you, and most of the time you won't know what it means until the year unfolds. But every now and then something will come up and go, that's what my angel card was trying to tell me. Mine was creativity this year. And I always think of myself as a very creative person. So it just made me stretch my creativity just a little bit more. But something is always coming up that reminds me of what that angel card was telling me my year would be like. And this being here today is part of it, because the very essence of this sermon has to do with the daily word today, which is about creativity. I am the divine expression of infinite creative energy. And I see myself that way, don't you? I am the divine expression of infinite creativity. So that's what I'm talking about today. The divine feminine is about creativity. Where does creation begin? Where does life begin? Who gives birth? And when we talk about the divine feminine, we're not talking about women only. We're talking about men as well, because the feminine gives birth to ideas, gives birth to things. It gives birth to inspiration. That's the divine feminine. And when I think about the divine feminine, I can't help but think of some of the women who have influenced my life, whose creativity has made my career, whose creativity has inspired me. And one of those is Bessie Coleman. And many of you know that I do a one-woman show called Follow Your Dreams, and it's called The Bessie Coleman Story. And I was going to dress up as Bessie today, but I thought, well, it's kind of hard to juxtaposition from Sandra to Bessie. I've done it, but you know, it might scare some people if they think I have a split personality. And maybe I do. But in this, I reenact the life of Bessie Coleman. And there's some of my coworkers here who got to see this from the very beginning, who retired just like me from the Federal Aviation Administration and surprised me today. Clarence and Gwen Hill and Natasha and Charles Chappelle, all good friends. We go back 40 years. 40 years. So thank you for, they said did you see it on Facebook? You saw it on email. Oh, okay. Who emails? Duh. Somebody reads email around here. And so what got me about Bessie Coleman was her creativity and ingenuity. And that's what the divine creation is about. That's what this is about. She gave birth to an idea that other people said would never happen. She gave birth to an idea that black people could fly airplanes. And she gave birth to this idea. It was so big in her mind that other people couldn't fathom it, that she took French in a night school in Chicago and went to France because no one in this country had the vision that she had to allow a black person to learn to fly. Now that's divine creativity. That's divinity in action. This woman saw the God in herself when no one else, some people couldn't see that. And she had the courage to go way beyond her boundary from Chicago to Paris to learn to fly in French, not her native language. She had to learn French at a night school in Chicago before she could go. And this whole concept of Bessie so inspired me that my divine feminine went to action and wrote a one-woman show that took me some of everywhere, all the way to Alaska, to Florida, to Paris, where she got her license, just by following that creative instinct that is born within each of us. When God breathed life into man and made man a living soul, that breath of life is creativity. That's the whole creation story in a nutshell. You create every single day. Every breath you take, every thought you think is a creation. And Scripture says you become a new creation. You know, our cells turn over and recycle, and they die off, and new cells are born every few minutes, every few seconds. We are a new being every breath we take. You are a new being, a new creation. So when I talk about divine creativity and we talk about the divine feminine, we're talking about the female intuition that is in each of us. The male represents the intellect, and the female represents the emotion or the intuition. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, co-founders of Unity, were the yin and the yang. And last week, Dr. Brummett talked about the yin and the yang, that we need both. We need balance. If you're to this or to that, you're lacking balance. So we need that male and female energy operating within each of us in order to be whole. And so when Charles and Myrtle Fillmore founded Unity, Myrtle was the feeling and the emotion of unity. For those who may not be familiar with how Unity started, Myrtle Fillmore and Charles Fillmore lived here in Kansas City. And Myrtle was diagnosed with terminal tuberculosis. All of her life she'd been very ill, and her family told her that she was a sickly child. If anybody was going to get something, it was going to be Myrtle. So Myrtle bought into that idea. The breath that was breathed over Myrtle was the breath of, you're doomed. You know, that's what she heard. When Myrtle got the news that she had 6 months to live, somehow she and Charles were invited to hear a speaker, an evangelistic speaker from New Thought, which is, New Thought movement was the origin of Christian Science, science of mind, and eventually Unity. And she went to hear this speaker. She had pretty much given up. They said, I'm going to die in 6 months. I might as well just pack up my tent and go. But her friends insisted she should hear this man. His name was Reverend E.B. Weeks. It was sort of like a revival here in Kansas City. Now, of all the things he said, of all the breath that he breathed, the one breath that he breathed life into for Myrtle was when he said, I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. Now, how many of you have looked up your DNA? You've gone to Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and some of those, me too. And you look and you see what your history is, where folks came from, and maybe you even have talked about a history of family illnesses. And when you fill out a form at the doctor's office, they often ask you, you know, do you have this history in your family? You know, do you have heart disease? Do you have cancer? Do you have this and that? And some of us buy into this idea that, well, you know, my mother had it, so I'm probably going to have it. My father had it, so I'm probably going to have it. Well, Myrtle had that idea, because that's common. We all do that. You know, arthritis runs in my family, or cancer runs in my family, or does it have to run in you because it runs in your family? Myrtle believed it did, because that's what she'd been told. So after hearing E.B. Weeks say that one statement, she probably blocked out everything else he said, just like you're going to do. You're going to act like today you're watching a soap opera, Days of Our Lives, As the World Turns, whatever. And you're going to tune in and out. When you hear something that you think might resonate with you, you'll grab a hold of it. Otherwise, you're going to wait till I talk about somebody's pregnant or dies, just like they do on the soap opera. And then you'll pay attention. So something I say, hopefully, will grab you and you'll take hold of it. And that's what happened with Myrtle and E.B. Weeks. She took hold of that. He breathed life into her consciousness that day. She took that home with her and she thought, that makes sense. If I'm a child of God, made in the image and likeness of God, how can I inherit disease from God? If it runs in my family and God is my Father, in Unity we say Father, Mother, God, Alpha, Omega, all, it is it all. How can I inherit that from God? So Myrtle started taking this into her consciousness, and she went into silence, stillness. That's why Unity practices meditation. She brought that concept. Charles, on the other hand, being intellectual, thought there's got to be more to it than this. Let me look into this. Let me do some research. Let me do some studying. And he started looking at the world's wisdom traditions that Nian mentioned earlier. And he started seeing the common threads in these basic wisdom teachings all over the world. And he started looking at it from the concept of what Jesus taught. I and the Father are one. Lest you become as children, you shall not inherit the kingdom. What does that mean? Children are innocent. They listen. They pay attention to everything you do, every word you say. And they don't take it necessarily, well, they do take it literally until they gain understanding. But once you gain understanding, you stop looking at the literal and you start looking at, how does this relate to me? How can I apply this to my life? How can I do as Jesus did? That's breathing life. That's that creative force in you. Johnny Coleman was the first African-American Unity minister who stood against the tide. The tide was that she could not as an African American, she could not live on the campus at Unity Village. She could not eat in the restaurant. She could not swim in the swimming pool. She had to find a family in Kansas City, a black family who she didn't know, who would put her up. And then, like the movie Hidden Figures, she'd have to find a way to get from Kansas City to Lee Summit to Unity Village, and she was often late. And when she was late, she would be chastised. And then the divine creative worked among her classmates. And they got the intuition, they got the guidance from within that, we can't just sit back and watch this and do nothing. We're either part of the solution or we're part of the problem. And they stood up for Johnny and they said, if you don't let her stay on this campus, we're going to walk out. That's divine creativity. They were willing to risk everything. Johnny got a cottage was set up for her on the campus. It's still standing. Johnny went on to form the Universal Foundation for Better Living with 4,000 congregants in Chicago. It's still going strong. And a K through 12 school. She died about 3 years ago at the age of 92. And her congregants still come here. They reconciled 15 years ago before she died. Those who had nothing to do with the discrimination and the segregation apologized and built a bridge between the Universal Foundation for Better Living and Unity. So now her congregants come and we're all one family. We're all one family. And I said all that to say it takes courage to expand your creativity to the point where you work against the tide, you push against the envelope, you stretch yourself outside of what some people think you should or should not be doing, especially in a religious setting or a spiritual setting. And speaking of which, let me go back to Bessie Coleman. After getting to France and learning to fly, she decided that wasn't good enough. She had to use her divine creativity to make it possible for others who looked like her to be able to learn to fly in this country. And she died doing that. Next year, we will celebrate 40 years of a program we have in Chicago for free at the grave at the cemetery where she's buried, honoring a woman who opened the door wide enough so that my friends, my coworkers, and all of you can follow your dreams. That's divine. That's the divine feminine. It's not just about me. Myrtle Fillmore knew that what she was onto was not just about her, that it would create a movement. They didn't expect to create a church or a religious institution. In fact, they were totally against that. They felt people should go to their own churches and worship where they wanted. Unity leaves nobody out. And a lot of people have questions about unity. What is unity? Some of you who are new, what is unity? It's everything. It doesn't matter what your practices are, you'll find something in unity that you'll be able to grab a hold to that will resonate with you, like she did when she went to hear E.B. Weeks speak. I am a child of God. That's what unity is about. All of us are children of God. So divine creativity, that divine feminine, that intuition, that love, that unconditional love that lives, that we give birth to, that's what this is all about. That's what womankind is about. There are men who probably say, well, why isn't there a mankind workshop or conference? Well, it's not fair, it's sexist to have a womankind conference. But there's the feminine qualities in each of us, but there's something about when women get together. I'm not leaving out you men. You're the wind beneath our wings, but there's something about when women get together, that consciousness. We see other people's children as our own, whether we have children or not. We see other people's grandchildren as our own. We can identify with people at a different level. And so that's why this nurturing that will take place next Saturday, you need to go tell all your friends they need to be here at Womankind. All day Saturday, it's going to be great. It's going to be phenomenal. So Jesus was spiritual and not religious. I don't know if you knew that. He was not a Christian. His last name was not Christ. He was a Jew. He was spiritual. He saw that the Jewish faith was telling people to do things and be things that didn't seem practical. And unity is based on the teachings of Jesus Christ as practical Christianity. So when I think about divine creativity, I think about Genesis, the 2nd chapter and the 7th verse. In the beginning, God breathed life into his nostrils and man became a living soul. Every time you take a breath, you should remember that you are creating. You are divine creativity in action. So I asked some quotes on the screen by some of the authors or some of the speakers on Sunday that I thought you might enjoy. And my order may not be the same because I changed my talk, so I'll look up. Marianne Williamson, I'm sure you've heard of Marianne Williamson. A Return to Love, one of her first books. She's going to be one of the headliners, and she said, when our minds move in harmony through forgiveness or prayer or the simplest tender thought, then the universe shifts and mountains move. That's what happens when we gather together in consciousness. That's what happened when Myrtle Fillmore established or led Charles to understanding where she was coming from, went into the silence and healed from the inside out. She was in her 40s when she was diagnosed. She lived another 40 years, and that's how Silent Unity, or the Center for Silent Help, was born, and that's how Unity came to be. She was a very spiritual woman. I won't say she was religious, she was very spiritual, and that's what this is all about. I don't know what order they're in, so I'm going to turn myself around here. Dr. Judith Orloff will be speaking. Men have a hard time in our culture. They have been brought up to be linear and logical and not to develop their intuition. How many of you men feel that way? Sometimes you want to, just give me the facts. Just get to the point, and we're trying to paint you a picture and give you the feeling of it, and you don't want to feel it, you just want to know it, right? Just skip a page, just jump over that, you stand there going, okay, get to the point. But that's because the divine feminine needs to express itself in a creative way. And when you learn as males to do that, you can get along much better with other women, especially your significant others. So how do you activate this feminine side? Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams is one of them. She said, spiritual life is about transformation, but it's also, and most importantly, about working with what is. Working with what is. Don't try to change yourself. Don't try to be something you're not. Don't try to study all this stuff and try to master it by memory. Just allow the Spirit of God in you to show up in its natural form. Just allow that Spirit to show up. And don't be embarrassed, even if it's your first time. Don't be embarrassed. Just let it show up. People will see that Spirit. They will hear your heart speak. One of the first things I do when I prepare for a sermon is say, Lord, show me what I'm supposed to say. Tell me what I'm supposed to do. And I know that if I'm speaking from my heart, the right people will hear what my intention was. You can't say the wrong thing to the right people because they will hear your heart. I've had people, I'm sure Reverend Ian has this experience a time or two, and I've heard that Duke has had it, many ministers have. You have given a sermon, you have it all written out, you know what you're going to say, and somebody comes up to you after and says, I love that you said about such and such, and you go back through your notes, I didn't say that. What? Because people hear what they need to hear. Maybe E.B. Weeks didn't say, I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. Maybe it said something a little different, but what Myrtle heard was his heart speak. And that's what's important. Because I could wax poetic, I could read Plato, Aristotle, I can go through history and talk about all kinds of things that other people have said, but I need to come from my heart. And I need to speak from my heart, and I need you to listen from your heart. That's divine creativity, when you allow your heart to speak. Is there another one? Tama Keeves is going to be here Saturday. She said, just start dancing and the band will find you. How many of you think you have 2 left feet? You don't. Everybody's got talent. I love it when people say, I can't sing. Yes, you can. Now, I don't know what key I sing in, and sometimes it's not even a key. But I can still sing. So, use what talents the Lord gave you. The woods would be lonely if only those birds sang that sang best. It would be pretty quiet out there. A woman is the full circle. Within her is the power to create, nurture, and transform. That was Diane Merrichild. So, how did God create this divine creativity? Made in the image and likeness of God. In many of our churches and where I grew up, we see God as a he. We hear God as a he. It's always he, him. The women sort of take a back seat in Scripture. But I don't think that was the intention. I think it was just for want of a better way, instead of writing like we often do, she/he or they/ so forth. That wasn't around then, so they just chose he. But it was a patriarchal society, and it's been written over and over again and translated over and over again, mostly by men. But that doesn't mean that women are missing, because there's the divine feminine in all of us. So I want to share this with you. And it's not up here, so you can. How God created woman. When God created woman, he was working late on the 6th day. An angel came by and said, "Why spend so much time on that one?" God said she must be washable, not made of plastic. We know what's happening with plastics, right? Have more than 200 moving parts, which all must be replaceable. She must function on all kinds of food. She must be able to embrace several kids at the same time. Give a hug that can heal anything from a bruised knee to a broken heart, and she must do all of this with just 2 hands. The angel was impressed. Just 2 hands? Impossible. And this is the standard model? Too much work for one day. Why don't you wait until tomorrow and then finish her? I won't, said the Lord. I am so close to complete this creation, which will be the favorite of my heart. She cures herself when she's sick, and she can work 18 hours a day. The angel came near and touched the woman. But you made her so soft. She is soft, said the Lord, but I have also made her strong. You can't imagine what she can endure, what she can overcome. Can she think? Asked the angel. Not only can she think, she can reason and negotiate. The angel touched the woman's cheek. Lord, it seems that this creation is leaking. You put too many burdens on her. She's not leaking. It's a tear. What's it for? Said the angel. And the Lord said, tears are her way of expressing grief, her doubts, her love, her loneliness, her suffering, and her pride. This made a big impression on the angel. Lord, you are a genius. You thought of everything. The woman is indeed marvelous. Indeed she is. Woman has strengths that amaze man. She can handle trouble and carry heavy burdens. She holds happiness, love, and opinions. She smiles when she feels like screaming. She sings when she feels like crying. She cries when she's happy, and she laughs when she's afraid. She fights for what she believes in. She stands up against injustice. She doesn't take no for an answer when she can see a better solution. She gives of herself so her family can thrive. She takes her friend to the doctor if she's afraid. Her love is unconditional. She cries when her kids are victorious. She's happy when her friends are doing well. She is glad when she hears of the birth of a child or a wedding. Her heart is broken when a next of kin or a friend passes away, but she finds the strength to get on with life. She knows that a kiss and a hug can heal a broken heart. There is only one thing wrong with her. Only one thing. She forgets what she is worth. She is divinely created, and sometimes, she just needs to be reminded. God bless you all.